Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by Adequest, your cybersecurity and compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, I'm being joined by Jonathan Hiroshi Rossi, who is the CEO, that's Chief Educational Officer, and co-founder of a platform and website called Saya, or Saya University. Saya's mission is to provide and help develop cybersecurity education and awareness. Jonathan, how are you today?
Doing good. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And whereabouts are you hanging your hat these days?
I'm in Los Angeles. I would be in Tokyo, but these days with all the things that are going on, I am in Los Angeles, been here for the last 3 months and waiting to get back to Tokyo, my temporary home.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting time because it's kind of like wherever you were when this thing, we're talking about the virus or the pandemic started, that's pretty much where you have to hold up until things get better. And every country has its own different restrictions, limitations. Things in Japan here are relatively open. How are things down in LA right now?
They're opening. Mm-hmm. They're definitely changed. I've been here for 3.5 months. I had about 3 trips to Japan and 1 to Singapore, all of them canceled. I have a colleague that's on his way to Tokyo for one of the companies that we've invested in, and he's about to board a flight shortly, and he's going to be staying in quarantine for about 14 days before he can rejoin the rest of my team in Tokyo. So
I will circle back with you on that at a different time because I'd like to hear about his experience. Because right now, a lot of people in my situation here are afraid to leave the country because we might not be able to come back in. But it'd be interesting to come back to that. Well, hey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how that led into the creation of Saya?
Yeah, sure. So my background, I'm trained as a lawyer. I've been going back and forth between the United States and Japan for the last 10 years, starting companies, failing some initiatives, and really working and grinding and trying to build different types of systems, whether it's in the gaming platform or in the legal services. And then today, what's most relevant to security is cybersecurity education awareness. So I was looking at that entire marketplace and thinking, how could I impact the most number of people in the most lowest cost possible? And what I mean by that is when I see education awareness, and I came to that realization 2 years ago when I was hosting a series of conversations in Japan, live conferences that we would talk about data analytics, we talk about investigatory analytics, all kinds of things and tools that would be leveraged to manage large volumes of data. Then I started to think about security, upchain or upstream on a lot of these companies is how are they handling their most critical assets and what are they investing in to make sure that their companies' employees are properly addressing security. And I found that there was very little of that. And I decided that it was an opportunity for me to create a security awareness company that focuses on addressing really relevant content that was matching the environment of that community, whether it's a Japanese community or a community in Kenya. It's really trying to match the environment. I mean, about 80-90% of it might be universal, right? In other words, what I mean by that is everybody has similar experiences with their interaction with digital transformation, but there's that maybe 10 to 15, 20% that might be very different. And those 10 to 15, 20% is very critical. And so we looked at that and said, let's do something to address that. And let's reach the largest number of people worldwide. And so that's what our mission has always been, 1 billion people. And what I mean by that is you have 7.5 billion people worldwide and about 45-50% penetration of internet use. And with that, you have responsibility of ensuring that people that touch any type of connected device also have certain responsibility with that type of activity. So Saya was about bridging that and ensuring that every single person across the entire globe, in our case, Japan initially, had the right resources that are low cost, that was scalable, and that could be deployed relatively easily and match them linguistically, culturally. And so we build out a platform to take existing content, localize that for different marketplaces. And if it was not possible that the existing content can be properly localized, we'd layer that or augment that with our own existing content. So we would create that from the ground up, do the storyboard, really understand and learn about different issues that come up in the different countries. And in the case of Japan, you have data privacy rules that are very unique to Japan. You have different systems like My Number, which is sort of like their form of a social security system, and many other trajectories of security vectors or threat vectors that come up that are uniquely Japanese or uniquely Singaporean or uniquely Kenyan. And so we take all that and then we build that into a single platform called Sai University.
Wow.
And
That's
here we are.
that's a impressive goal. 1 billion people. That's amazing. Let's back up a little bit and just focus on the 130 million people that are in Japan. What differences? I mean, you mentioned a couple of the unique aspects of Japan. They've got My Number. They have some unique data protection and privacy rules and regulations. But in terms of cybersecurity awareness, where do you see Japan, say, in comparison to North America or Europe even?
Wow. I'd say in respect to security awareness, woefully underprepared.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that Americans are more prepared. Your everyday employee, and that's where we're looking at. Our focus is not IT. We're not training IT. We're not training people in the departments that are going to be building the systems or the technology stack and handling them from the technical perspective. We're looking at how does everyday employees across the entire enterprise, and even government employees, family units within a household, how are they prepared to address security awareness? If you look at people who are trying to attack all the malicious actors, they want to attack places that are easy to enter. And places that are easy to enter are going to be much easier in terms of resistance. That's much more simple just to penetrate through a phishing and then lateral their way in. Now, if that's the case, and if I was a threat actor, I'd say, well, the less security awareness there is, the better it is and success there is for the type of things that we do. So I'd say Japan is really underprepared, especially on the SMB side. I don't know what the numbers are. I haven't seen anybody look at what the penetration marketplace looks like for security awareness. I'd say it's very small. I'd say probably the large banks, some of the huge financial institutions probably have some degree of security awareness built into some of their arsenal, but
so I mean, I can give you some anecdotal evidence. Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, I'm in Japan right now, as you know, and I would say just a rough guesstimate, maybe 20 to 25, 30% of the websites that I visit, Japanese websites, are non-secure. They're not using the HTTPS. There's
Right.
and it's basically you're creating a website that could be a potential threat to your visitors by doing that, right? And then in terms of like the use of multi-factor authentication, yeah, I mean or two-factor authentication, many banks or financial institutions have some sort of system to do that, and they're actually pretty good about that. But when you go beyond that, in terms of just inside of companies and having, I was visiting a very large company, a couple, multi-billion-dollar organization recently, and we talked about the use of multi-factor or two-factor authentication for global admins. And they thought it was too troublesome to use that. And that's just kind of a standard practice outside of Japan. So I think there's, those are the IT people, but when it comes down to the people on the street, there's even less awareness, So I think you've got a big job, but like you said, a big opportunity ahead of you.
Exactly. And it's very unique because Japan is the third largest economy in the world. It's very sophisticated in one regard, but also not sophisticated on another perspective. So I've saw that time and time again over the years. And those are the challenges. Now, a good parallel with that is in legal. I started off in my business career in Japan after law school. And eventually, one of the first successful businesses that we deployed was a legal support services business in what's known as electronic discovery, e-discovery for short, in the United States. Now, a lot of Japanese companies over the last 10, 15 years have unfortunately been involved with major litigation in North America. And a lot of this has to do with compliance, not having the controls in place across their entire enterprise. And then they end up in a place like the United States or in Europe, and in my case, in the United States. and they get caught up in lots of multi-district litigation, government investigations, and massive amounts of fines, penalties, follow-on civil suits, which cost them billions of US dollars and even led to some people going to jail. Now, I'm looking at that, and this is still going on today. And you have a lot of Japanese companies that have improved in their internal controls and compliance. But I would say we're in the same situation for security awareness because Japan has not built in the right type of security protocols, specifically when it comes to ensuring that everyday employees, when you mentioned the website, and something as simple as that, are you ensuring that your visitors are protected? What about your employees, your subcontractors, your supply chain, upstream, downstream? What about your employees that are based in other countries? There was something that happened just a couple of days ago. A big automotive company just suffered a breach. I forgot which company. I think it was, I want to say, if I remember correctly, Honda.
It was
one of their
yeah.
subsidiaries, Honda, right?
Yeah.
And Toyota faced something similar about 6-7 months ago. Their subsidiary, and I want to say it's Belgium, they had faced something, a business email compromise, essentially a phishing scheme, and eventually lost, I think it was some $37 million. And they had to report this as a public company. They reported this and said, we're still investigating it. And I haven't followed up on this, so I don't know what ended up coming of this, but I remember seeing that public report that they had to disclose. And this is massive when you think about how much money they're losing. Whereas if you just invested in just basic awareness and ensured that every employee in the company has both taken some of these courses or ensured that they have properly developed the proper hygiene. So there's so many different layers to this, and I would say a lot of it is not even done.
So I think we can all agree that the human aspect is the biggest threat vector. I think something like 80% of all breaches originate from a phishing campaign, some kind of malware attached to an email, and somebody clicks on it. But so tell me a little bit about your education programs. How do you go about creating awareness? And we can talk about Japan, or you can talk about other examples. But how do your courses look? What's the content like?
Yeah, so the content is built around organizations to strengthen the endpoints, which is just a fancy way to say every employee who touches any network, from your mailroom to the boardroom. And the coursework, and I try not to use the word coursework, but for this lack of a better word, let's just say it's a learning pathway. And they have a number. Yeah, so the idea behind the courses is developing different learning pathways. And so every organization has to have a basic foundational knowledge of just the general threats that are out there. And so all of that is going to apply no matter what country you're in. And then with that, you would layer specific, either industry specific. So if you're in the pharmaceuticals, there might be very specific type of concerns they may have. And if you go even more granular, there may be certain policies that you can layer into some of the conversations and the learning courses that you build into that. So what we do is we start with basic foundation work. 80% of it is going to be the same, no matter what country you're in, no matter what language you're operating in. And then from there, we layer in, depending on industry, depending on threat vectors specific to that department, that are unique. And that's how we sort of built out each learning pathway. And we have different ways to have metrics so you can measure outcomes, because the goal here is to be able to shift and change behavior. It's one thing of just getting people to go and watch videos and then look at them and then learn. But how do you test that? And you want to have phishing campaigns. Do you have them where you employees learning over time? This is something you have to look at different methodologies and modalities in psychology. How do people learn? How do they retain information? And can you test that? And that's what we try to do, and deploy that through one single module where you can do all of that together in an organization, whether you run it through a third-party company that manages that, like ourselves, or you can deploy that internally, have internal chief learning officers or somebody internally can manage that entire campaign. So I would say most Japanese companies, especially if you're looking at SMBs, they're not going to have a chief learning officer or somebody to devote it to that. So you're going to do a lot more of hand-holding in that process, which means that you or one of us would have to work with each organization. And so it's a lot of work actually to do this. You have to get them to first understand the importance of security as not an IT issue itself, but as a responsibility across the entire organization. So we really have to spend time educating senior executives of the company or board members. And that's the challenge, I think, in Japan, is to communicate that to the prospective people who are in those positions, who tend to be much older. And in some ways, I would say, if to be honest, is often out of touch with the realities of how critically important security is. And that's the part that I think is the one of the most challenging, is how do we communicate that effectively to the executives and do it where they can invest both budgetary, monies and dollars into this, and then also ensure that the organizations within that company are dutiful in that process, and make sure that we can actually do this properly. So yeah, it's multifaceted, to be honest. There's very few people doing security awareness in Japan, and it's a new booming field. And we're still seeing just the early stages of it.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about some of the older people, and I'm not here to pick on older people because I'm getting up there in years myself. But in Japan, the government official who was appointed to be the I can't remember, Minister of Cybersecurity, after his appointment, he admitted that he'd never used a computer in his life. And I was like, well, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence.
Yeah,
I'm sure he's a great administrator and he'll get stuff done. But it just kind of goes to your point. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How do companies engage with you? I mean, what kind of a business model do you have to deliver your learning paths?
It's a license agreement. We have a deployment where individual organizations would purchase a set of licenses, and they would use that depending on the number of employees that they have in the organization. And so we operate that way. That's generally for the security awareness education side. We also have our free learning path, which is a lot of our events that we do on site. So we invite them to seminars. We have public campaigns that we do regularly in Japan. Before COVID-19, we used to host these large-scale security awareness conferences, what we used to call SAYA summits in Tokyo. We hosted one a few months back before the COVID-19 in Tokyo at the Tokyo American Club, where we had hundreds of people across Japan participate and outside of Japan. So we invite a lot of Japanese companies to participate and learn about what the threats look like and how they can build better defenses. And we invite people from the public, from the private, from government.
Just out of curiosity here, you mentioned you had 100 or 200 people at this event in Tokyo. What was the profile of the people in attendance? Were these business executives, or were these IT professionals, or were these just general consumers? Who were they?
There were a combination of business executives. There were a lot of people from compliance, people that were attorneys. And unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, it's understood sometimes as a compliance function. And that's, for good or bad, it is what it is. And so we have a lot of people coming from the compliance department, from chief compliance officers to individual attorneys that are working with a lot of compliance departments across Japan. So the profile was quite diverse. We have people that are working in the more early stage companies, tech companies. And so the goal with that, it was always, how do we expand this conversation outside of IT? I didn't want it to be an IT conversation. Once I start going to that, there's other formats, forums for that type of conversation. I went to a thing called Code Blue. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's like Japan's version of like a DEF CON. If you've ever been to DEF CON in Las Vegas, and they have hackathons, they do red teaming and all that kind of stuff. And it's fun. I was there not too long ago, the last one they did. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to engage with media, people in the communications, entertainment. We want people to talk about this so that everybody is aware of the importance of security, and that to make that into a mainstream interactive session. And that's what we do. And a lot of our campaigns, our public facing campaigns, is not really focused on speaking to other cybersecurity. So I like having that opportunity to speak to people that are outside. Like next week, I have a show that I'm going to be hosting, and we'll be inviting guests from Japan. And we're not going to talk too much about cybersecurity. There'll be a small segment of cybersecurity, but we're going to talk about Japanese ringi system. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I'm sure you are, since you're in Japan. So
explain it for those that might not be familiar.
The ringi system is a form of Japanese consensus building internally at a company. And it happens, I say, almost all the time in every single Japanese corporation where you have to go and build consensus within each different department. And
And you can do that
that,
so quickly, right?
yeah, if you have the
So,
patience and a couple of years.
it's that's one of the I guess there's goods and bad sides to it, but when you first get here, it can be a little frustrating because things take a long time.
Yeah, it does. And there's good things for that and bad things. And we're going to talk a little bit about the historical underpinnings of the Ringi show and the Ringi system. And that's going to be something we talk about in more of a general, broad, historical, intellectual inquiry. So it's going to be fun.
But how does
But
that relate to cybersecurity awareness?
if you want to tie it back to security awareness, is sales into Japanese organizations, or you and I are in sales. How do you sell into a Japanese organization? How do you interact with various different departments within the organization? Do you target the IT department? Do you focus on the executive? How do you get introductions to key decision makers within an organization? And as you know, Japan could be a very insular country. And it's not easy, even if you spoke the language, to penetrate Japanese culture, business culture. And so it
One thing that's
really
really
takes. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. One of the things that's it's kind of difficult during this COVID time is that people, I said things are relatively open here, but for a couple
Yeah.
months, most face-to-face meetings were discouraged. And in the U.S., I would do 90% of my deals without having met people face to face because we do everything remotely. I mean, even if before COVID, I mean, you just do conference calls and you find out what the customer wants. You put together a solution, and they're like, "Yeah, let's go with it." And especially in the cybersecurity area, because you're dealing with, in my particular case, I'm dealing with a lot of IT professionals. And they're just like, hey man, if you can solve this problem, let's get on with it. We don't need to sit down in a meeting room together. That said, in Japan, if it takes, you need to have that face-to-face contact, typically, historically, to build the relationship. And you need to have several face-to-face contacts. And you might have to have, some meals together or drinks together to kind of accelerate that if possible. But during this time where people just aren't meeting, it's kind of, I feel sorry for business development professionals in Japan who don't have an established customer base. If you've got that established customer base, fine. They're loyal, they'll stick with you. But if you're just trying to get things going right now, it could be challenging.
I got a question for you. How are you prospecting new opportunities? How do you do that in a situation like this, where if you don't have a customer base and you're starting and saying, okay, how do I begin? I can't meet them face to face. I'm going to rely on my existing network to get an introduction to a company. And let's say that was a target company you wanted to get an introduction to. How would you start?
Yeah, so I know this podcast is about cybersecurity awareness, but you ask an interesting question. And what I do is I tend to focus on a very small niche, and I work with a lot of foreign multinationals who tend to even if their country managers are Japanese, they tend to be a bit more progressive, or that's probably not the right word. Maybe they're more international in terms of their customs and business acumen. Okay, and I have a pretty extensive network in Japan. I've been pretty active in the ACCJ, which is the American Chamber of Commerce Japan. And so I leverage that network to get introductions. I also do occasionally, I mean, believe it or not, in the last 3 months, I've had a couple legitimate opportunities come in from LinkedIn posts. You post something, people are like, oh, I wasn't aware that you do that. You provide that kind of service. Can we set up a call? So that's what I've been doing. And it's not the ideal method, but it's what we are, what we're kind of forced to do at this point. Now, as things open up here, what I've done in the past is actually, it's really good to have some Japanese boots on the ground, Japanese experienced business development professionals or solution architects, and then we go out together, because a lot of Japanese companies, and I guess it's not really about cybersecurity, but if you want to do business in Japan, it's important. Japanese business people, they might love your product and service, but they really feel more comfortable if you have a Japanese project manager, or they know that you have a Japanese colleague on the ground here that they can communicate with, oftentimes. So that's kind of the strategy that I've used in the past is, I get the meetings, but then I bring in my local solution architect or project manager, etc. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Oh, it does. It makes a lot of sense to me. We do all of the above. So you want to take it back to security awareness. So how about we talk about, there was an interesting report that came out published by the Ministry of Communication in Japan. And they published a report back in 2016. And in that report, it said Japan had faced in that year, 2016 or 2015, depending on which year they were looking at for this report that came out in 2016, is they had faced 128 billion incidents of cybersecurity attempts. Whether they were successful, that wasn't the point of the report. The report really wanted to highlight the vast amount of security attempts, the billions of attempts that are coming at them from multiple sources, right? These aren't just hackers sitting alone in the basement. These are organized. So what was interesting about this report is that it was looking at all the threat vectors and how much cybersecurity incidents, not necessarily incidents, but I would say the way they characterize it was there was over 126 billion cybersecurity attempts in Japan against critical infrastructure, against the entire country. And what was fascinating about this is not necessarily that this is happening, but we all know it's happening. The companies in Japan, they know this is going on, but what are they doing to ensure that they're putting the right it's challenging because you can rattle off all kinds of things like this and say there's all these security issues in Japan, one company after another getting breached. It's how do you translate that into action in the right places? And that's the issue. We're always trying to look at communicating to people.
I think one of the challenges is you touched on it earlier is a lot of organizations and the people in those organizations view cybersecurity as an IT problem. And so they'll be willing to throw money at IT solutions. But, you could have the best firewalls, you can have the best threat protections, threat detections, intrusion detection systems, security operations centers. You can have all that. But if your employees don't have, understand basic email hygiene, right? If they're clicking on links that malicious links that are sent to them, sooner, that's going to open up the door. And so, I really think that's this whole technology versus education discussion is interesting. And I think, that needs to start, like you said earlier, at the C-suite as well, where the leadership understands really what is cybersecurity and where does it start. And basically, I'm taking a course right now, an online course through Harvard. And they make it very, very clear that cybersecurity, that is every person in the organization is responsible for security and cybersecurity. Being aware, and then reporting. That's another thing in Japan. What are your thoughts about if somebody makes a mistake? Are they encouraged to directly report that? Is there a high degree of transparency, or is that something that needs to be fostered?
Okay. Both. You need a culture of reporting, but you also need the legal regime that ensures that companies have to ensure that they report. So let's say you contrast that with the United States. The United States has a breach notifications across almost every state. For a company, those are challenging. It could be onerous and expensive because now you have to deal with every single state. Every state's going to have different breach notification rules. You have GDPR in Europe, you have CCPA in California, and every different country may have their own. Japan recently just passed and amended their APPI, their data privacy rules. And what you need is multiple things in Japan. You need also the right type of legal regulatory regime that one has teeth and that's enforced. And then you also need to foster an education within the organization to ensure that people do what they should be doing. And so it's multi-pronged, and you have to start even with beyond the organization. You have to build the right kind of cultural importance of education around security. I would say starting from a young child, every time a child receives a device, there should be with that corresponding conversation that they have to treat that device with the proper type of etiquette. And that is a critical function of what we also are doing too. We have a lot of conversations around family safety and children online security. How do we do that? We're not just focusing on just the corporate safety and security. That's more of, they're incentivized because they want to keep protections around their trade secrets to ensure people are not stealing. That's fine. Yeah, and you have that. But what about when you're looking at the crown jewels of the home? I'm not talking about your children, you're talking about your family's information. Those are also just as
I mean,
important. And so what
I
we're
know
trying
so
to
many
do.
parents that are like,
Mhm.
how do I put parental controls on
Yeah,
these devices, and what's the best way to do it? What are best practices? And it's like a lot of times you get together with other parents
yeah,
and we're all comparing notes. How many hours of screen time?
yeah,
How
yeah.
do you make sure? How do you track where they go? Do you and all that kind of stuff? So sorry, I cut you off. Please continue.
No, 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 that's very important. How do we make learning paths around that? And so we're storyboarding a couple of videos and different discussions around how do we make compelling, short, informative videos for Japanese that in that really engages families, mothers and fathers and children to treat this as the most important thing that they should be doing. So that part is hard to do because it's trying to take sometimes complicated information and making it simple and engaging. And so we're doing all kinds of different things to do that. And we want to engage and listen to see like what works and what doesn't work. And that takes
No,
a
but
lot.
it's very important. So hey,
Yeah.
you've shared a
Yeah.
lot of interesting information. If any of our listeners wanted to find out more about your platform, where can they find?
Sure.
Where can they go?
Well, they can go on LinkedIn. We do a lot of work on LinkedIn through the Saya University page. They can contact me, Jonathan, at the Saya University page directly. They can contact me. We do a lot of content marketing. I recorded a live stream earlier today with a cybersecurity expert in Sierra Leone. I'll be doing one next week with Singapore. I produce, and all of us at Saya produce lots of content, both in English and Japanese and Spanish. And so they can find us somewhere online.
I'll put some
We're
links. I'll
we're
put some
always there.
links below
Yeah.
the podcast. But go ahead
Sure.
and could you just
Mhm.
spell out your URL for everybody?
Sure. It is Saya, Saya, university.com. There's a English version and a Japanese version.
Perfect.
And we also publish a lot of content, written content on all kinds of things. We just finished up a three-part series on phishing. And so
Excellent. Well,
yeah, it's very, very
well, I,
fascinating. Content.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
Mhm.
just appreciate the information that you shared and your time. What's next for you? I mean, you mentioned you're doing podcasts and
Mhm.
doing workshops. I mean, what's up in the next couple months? What's on
Yeah.
your itinerary?
Getting
Getting
back
back
to
to Japan.
Japan, actually.
Excellent. Good luck with that.
Requires face to face, and you mentioned the importance of face to face, and there's so many important meanings that really need to be addressed, and it's hard to do
Hmm.
that over the phone, and that's something I'm hoping to be able to get to in the next month or two once I can get to Japan. There's a lot public
Mhm.
campaigns. We have a lot of great partnerships that we're building with different Japanese organizations to bring to life our security awareness. There's so much every day that we go that's not allowing us to reach an audience. For me is an opportunity for a malicious act to penetrate a network. And that's the way I see it. Like every single day that goes without the right proper hygiene around cybersecurity to us is a day where a penetration or phishing or BC or some kind of an attack vector may penetrate an organization or family. So for us, it's a very personal thing. We want to be able to reach an audience and do that as effective as we can. So the next couple months, we're hoping to continue the public campaign side, what we can do online, given the nature of the current situation with pandemic or COVID-19. So
Well, yeah. So sounds good. If you
yeah,
make it to Japan, let me know. We'll hook up and grab a beverage of some type and
the,
compare notes. But hey, Jonathan, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I wish you the best.
thank you. Thank you, Mark, for having me.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.